Hey guys, welcome to Irish Medieval History. And this week I'm joined by Stephen Macmillan from Celtic Decoded. And this week we're covering the subject of the Vikings and the Dál Riata. So Stephen, do you want to take us away and give us an introduction into the Dál Riata, especially since you have a video covering this subject, well, the introduction into the Dál Riata this week.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us on. So I did
you're
just
welcome.
recently make a video on Dál Riata. Yeah, so basically Dál Riata was a Gaelic kingdom. It was the kingdom of the Gaels in a sense. It covered the kind of northeastern corner of Ireland, like Antrim, County Antrim, and the western seaboard of Scotland. So the coast of the Gaels, Argyll region, and a lot of the Hebridean islands, which are stunning, like Iona and islands of that nature, Isla. Also included Skye for a period as well. So it rose about arguably 5th century AD time. The peak was about the 6th and 7th centuries AD. Rulers like Aidan MacGabrain was one of the kind of core leaders during that time. But it basically rose, existed for a couple hundred years. And then there was a wee bit of, back and forth with the Picts. The Picts came in and conquered large parts of it for a period. And the Northumbrians controlled parts of it for a period as well. And then ultimately it was unified with the Picts to form the Kingdom of Alba or Alapa in the 9th century AD. And that was the kind of the end of Dal Riata and the kind of birth of Scotland, if you will. So it is a very interesting kingdom in general. Kenneth MacAlpin, known as kind of like one of the early King of Scots, the King of the Gaels. He's arguably one of the last kings of Dal Riata, and then obviously they merged with the Picts and became the kingdom of Alba or Alapa, I think it is in Gaelic. The kind of birth of the modern kind of embryo of Scotland. So no, it's very interesting. Played a role in like Christian civilization as well, just in the kind of that region, around that kind of region. So Iona was like a major part of Christianity at that point. It had a monastery. St. Columba kind of founded that monastery in Iona, one of the kind of Hebridean islands in Scotland. So that was a major feature, and that helped to spread Christianity around the world. So there's lots to it. It's a very interesting one. It's not one that's really discussed that often, like Dal Riata, the kind of Gaelic kingdom, but it's a fascinating story, and there's lots of angles to it once you kind of delve into it.
Yeah, there really is. Because I know this week we have to talk a wee bit of Vikings because the algorithm now is just jumping way up. But a good angle is the coming of the Vikings into the kingdoms of Dal Riata and stuff, which is quite fascinating in itself. I think it's around the end of the 8th century that we start to see the Vikings come in and cause massive influences. I know that there's a massive debate right now of especially the Picto. We do know that the Gaelic areas of the Dal Riata was starting to mix in because we know that they're starting to be referred to as the Gall Gael, and eventually they become the Galloglass, don't they? Where the Vikings start to take over. A lot of those are related to Scottish families, aren't they, as well, Michael?
Well, see, that's as Stephen sort of touched on there. The families that sort of migrated from Ireland to Scotland, or what the countries are now, Ireland and Scotland. There's a debate on how much of that migration actually was just the ruling elites, and how much of the general population of Irish Gaelic settlers moved into the Isles. But many families obviously would sort of claim descent from those kinships that went across. Stephen's already touched on the Gabran, and you got the Comgal or Cowell. They gave the name. This is terrible pronunciations because I would pronounce it Comgal, but it must be very similar to Cowell, which is because they gave their name to the Cowell Peninsula, and they would own probably northern half of Aran, and you would have there's literally several hundreds of kennel branches, beneath them, kindreds beneath them. The Kinloran were the biggest of the three, and they've literally got at least 20 or 30 known sort of kennel branches. So you can imagine how many sort of families would be taking this, relationship as saying that they're from the Gaelic kingdom, even though we know that there was Brythonic settlements in those areas before the the Gaelic families came across, and there would be Pictish tribes and stuff in those areas even while they were under the rulership of those Gaelic kingdoms. We see it even in later on with the there's a big misconception on what areas spoke Scots, what areas spoke Gaelic in Scottish history, and so these sort of communities, there was no set line, although the mountain ridge along the edge of the kingdom of the Gaelic kingdom tends to be classed as the border. The lines were very blurred and often moved backwards and forwards. So these families would obviously eventually, with the Norse settlers that would come in eventually around 795, I believe, they would intermarry. There was another misconception that the Norse raiders would come in and kill every man a male and just marry all the women, which is terrible for any economy. But I don't think they did that, but they definitely killed many of them to take the women. I mean, there's only 365 days in a year, so there's only so many women you can really fit in. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's very true. Because I always took it, I did previously, like this time last year, I did take it very much from the kind of nationalist, kind of romantic idea of the Vikings came from Norway and they just genocided everybody, and then they put a big flag on top of a dead body and went, "This is our land." Rather than from a medieval point of view, which would have been, possibly you guys would probably correct me on this because Scottish history is way out of my field, but the way I'm now picturing it after reading a good few books on the subject and stuff is that what mostly may have happened is that the Norwegians came in and then they kind of became the new nobles. They had removed the old nobles, killed off a good few of the Pictish and Scoto that were already in that area, and then they became the nobles of that area. Is that what happened, or?
Certainly know the Vikings like taking it to Dál Riata as well. Dál Riata was obviously like a seaborne kingdom, so it was very susceptible to like naval invasions and sea invasions. So I know they definitely sacked Iona, which was the important kind of centre of Dál Riata, and had the monastery there. I think it was about 798 AD. They came in and sacked that kind of like island. But like I say, the Vikings obviously they're depicted as being barbarians, etc. But I'm sure they must have been smart to kind of survive for such a period of time, and they must have set up some sort of nobility and kind of traded with people. And like Michael was saying, they need to be economical and kind of like trade with people to have power in more ways than just conquering. And once they came to a land, to hold the land, they had to work with the people that were there as well. They couldn't have just killed them all. So it is hard to say. We're interested to see what Michael says about the kind of the dynasties that they may have been part, founded. I think he is working on something to do with the Vikings anyway.
Yeah, this is another issue as well that you would have, is that whenever a ruling family came in to a certain area, depending on the trend of the time, even every 100 years, would depend on maybe where this family would sort of say they descend from. The MacNeils, who are a perfect example of this in the areas that we're talking about right now, for centuries had claimed this descent from the O'Neills, the O'Neill clan, being from Niall of the Nine Hostages, which is why they were the MacNeils. Yet recent DNA studies have shown that they are of Norse descent, and no doubt that the claim to be of this from this Gaelic kingdom was possibly to try and link them in with the likes of maybe Robert the Bruce and Edward the Bruce when he was putting his claim forward into Ireland, is to show that this link, that Robert strove to, when he wrote his letter to the Pope and said how these ancient countries were connected, no doubt people like the MacNeils would jump onto that to sort of say, yes, and we are one of those descendants. So, it gives them a bit of prestige. Or they may have actually thought they were, and Mrs. MacNeil 10,000, to 1,000 years ago wasn't very honest on who, who she was with that night. So there's a lot of, obviously, you've got to take that with there are non-paternal events that you're going to be aware of, but by and large, most of these noble families were pretty good at keeping track on what they were up to. So
the lineage.
yeah, I don't want to delve too much into non-paternal events because that can cause people to be very offended. I am no offense meant to any McNeil from 1,000 years ago.
The McNeils will be after you.
Yeah, because it is very fascinating how originally you would have had the Pictish people and it would have been Pictland, and then we have the arrival of the Dal Riata, but they don't quite finish their conquest until the middle of the Viking Age, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the Picts were basically absorbed by Dal Riata, it seems. The Gaelic language was kind of like Pictish obviously disappeared, and Gaelic Irish still exists today. So I think basically the sources are quite scant on what happened around that period, to be honest. Like from what I've read anyway. But there seems just so many forces all kind of coalescing at the same time. But it certainly seems that Dal Riata absorbed Pictland in many ways, or the Gaels absorbed Pictland, even if you just think linguistically. And even like the Christian faith is brought into Pictland as well, as far as I understand anyway. So they kind of swept across the entire country, it seems, and unified certain groups into kind of one, but their kind of culture and language predominated.
That's what I was really getting into as well, is that there is a massive lack of literature. For example, like most historians and archaeologists are doing their arguments through DNA. They're not doing it through the literature. So it's like a complete blackout happens when you have the Vikings who come in and settle in the likes of the Orkney Islands and stuff, where it's like the lights go off and then suddenly the Vikings have taken over the island.
No, I'm not entirely. There are, I feel, enough. Now Philip has this great analogy that brought me one of the things that I found great when he said to me is that history is like looking through a keyhole and you can only see what's on the other side of that keyhole, behind the door. And there are lots of keyholes around that time. We have the Orkney Isles that are being taken over at the time. Now we don't know much about the Pictish community that lived there that the Vikings would displace, but we do get a sort of the stories as well. I believe are another good example. Like we know that the Kinocon Gaeli of the Dal Riata, one of their stories is that they marry the sons married Pictish princesses, and this is how they were able to not abuse, but take advantage of the maternal succession laws. Now, that's obviously we're still debating whether that's the case, but this is one of their stories, and that's how they were able to take over some of the Pictish kingdoms, and spread their influence. And there's also other avenues to sort of explore on this as well, like why did Gaelic become the more dominant language? Because there's still debate about Kenneth MacAlpin's paternity, whether he was a Pictish or paternally a Pictish or a Gaelic king. Now, you could argue if Gaelic became the more predominant language, that surely that's the language of the court, that's the language of the nobles. So therefore, he was a Gaelic king. I'm not saying which side of the fence I sit on that. I'm just saying that's one of the arguments that you may hear. So there, and also not only that, but it's you have other areas that were outside of that influence, like what would become the Earldom of Ross, was quite outside that sphere for quite a long time, from the Scottish court. So there's like it, and that's where Stephen was saying there as well, that there are multiple angles to this and a lot of things happening all at the same time, that it's almost like reading Wikipedia. And you click a link and you go through, and you click a link and you go through, and you click a link and you go through, and you get bits of this information, and then you sit there at the end and go, I didn't actually learn a damn thing. Not that I say Wikipedia is a good source to learn from, but but it's a great place to have a little whenever you're bored and go through. But I do find myself going down wiki rabbit holes and thinking, what did I actually click on this for? how did I end up on this page?
Yeah.
So, but yes, there's so much. I think there's a lot of information and not enough information for various sort of things, and it's trying to marry those up. It's having a Japanese plug for a European plug socket.
Oh yeah, I've had that joy. Yeah, but Scotland at this period is really exciting, although it's really blurry. And with recent DNA analysis and stuff coming out, and the recent books that myself and Michael have been really touching on, I keep forgetting the name of that book. It was Traders and Vikings and stuff. We'll put the picture below what it is.
Horn. Matthew Horn?
Sorry?
I don't want to say John Horn or Matthew Horn or something like that.
Yeah.
We'll put it in.
the author now is going to leave us a comment now below.
I'm literally going to leave it. I'm literally going to have the image here just the whole time. Just here.
Yeah. Hide behind it. But anyway, myself and Michael have been tearing it apart, and it's been talking a lot about DNA analysis with the Scoto. It's a new fancy word I came across only a few weeks ago now, because we had Hiberno-Scandinavian that we've been working with for a while now, but this one is a funny one, a tongue twister for me from when I first started. Scoto-Picto-Scandinavian, and it's fun word because the image that comes to my head straight away was a Viking that was topless, covered in blue tattoos, and that image is so deadly, and you'd only be able to find it in Scotland in the Viking Age, which is pretty awesome, to be honest with you. So the Viking Age seems to be way more exciting than what we previously thought, because we previously just thought, oh, the Vikings come in, they completely whitewash the Scots, and then eventually the Scots get back up and they push out the Vikings. But that clearly doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that, first off, you have the Dal Riata that come in from Ireland and start to occupy a good chunk. Now, this is where I get very confused of where's the Pictish parts of Scotland and where is the Gaelic parts of Scotland. And then I get even more confused, because Michael has tried to explain to me this a few times now when we're not doing the podcast and stuff. But then you have the Vikings come in and they take a chunk of territory. So when you were saying about when the first King of Alba takes over and stuff, I'm not even sure where he's from, because I'm like, but didn't those territories get taken over by the Vikings and stuff? Like, what's going on in the ground? Who are these Scoto-Picto-Scandinavian people? Like, what is going on here? Like,
yeah. It is so complicated, and obviously the words we use for like Scotland and stuff, it's like an integrated political unit, whereas at that point in time, and depending on what point in time you're looking at, it's obviously quite difficult. But obviously the Dal Riata, they basically controlled like the western seaboard, like Argyll region. The Picts were more like north, kind of centre north. Then you had kind of Northumbrians that went up into Edinburgh at some point, like all the way up kind of northeast England into like southeast Scotland. And then you had like the All-Clue, like Kingdom of Strathclyde, kind of in there. So there's so many interplays, and then you had the Vikings like round the Isles, and then they gradually kind of poured in. Like I say, it's really interesting, and how the interplay between all these different people, and the fact that there's Norse Gaels, and then there's the Scoto-Picto-Scandinavians. Is that what you said? There's like a multitude of different things. But I suppose it speaks to the fact that the Vikings did integrate with these different people to a certain degree, it seems, and they did coexist for certain periods. So it's very fascinating. It's certainly something I want to explore a wee bit more in my videos, like on Celtic History Decoded, going forward.
Because your channel is absolutely amazing, because it really explained to me the coming of the Dal Riata into Scotland and stuff. Because when I was in university, I covered the Irish side of it, which covered more of the golden age of Ireland, with the likes of Columba going into Iona and stuff, and it was more focused on Iona rather than anywhere else. And then it came full circle then when you had the Vikings coming in and they pushed poor Columba's followers out of Iona and had to come back into Kells and then finish off the Book of Kells in Ireland. And so it became full circle, teaching us Irish history and stuff, but we never really touched a full picture of what Dal Riata did in Scotland and stuff. So your video this week really brought it full circle for me. So I can't highlight enough, guys. Definitely go over to Celtic Decoded, subscribe, and definitely watch that video, because it really gives the foundation to this video here that we're trying to explore and trying to build up on. especially this week since we have 2 massive Viking subjects coming in to really pump up the algorithm for us. But yeah, Viking history in Scotland is really fascinating, especially when you do have the foundation that the Dal Riata had brought in, and especially with the new king that comes in from the Gaelic side, you guys were saying. And so, how did the Pictish nobles feel about this? Were they just anti him? Did they want to remove Kenneth, or were they just like, oh, Kenneth's the man, like, let's have him king of Scotland?
I think, like Michael said, there's a debate as to like who Kenneth MacAlpin was. Like, he's quite a fundamental figure, but no one really knows. Like, was he a Pict? Was he a a Gael type thing? And it seems he was a king. He was the king of Pictland for a period, and a king of Dal Riata potentially for a period, and then he became the king of Alapa, of Alba. So it is quite confusing. I don't know if there's definitive sources, but linguistically, obviously, I would probably say he seems more like he was maybe like of Gael, kind of Gaelic type leader. The fact that the language then predominated, but I might be wrong.
No, I think we've kind of touched on as much as, like I said earlier before this podcast started, was that it'd be very hard to condense sort of 400 years into a 20-30 minute video. And without sort of deviating too much and bringing ourselves back into another sort of discussion, because it's so easy to do, because we've only lightly touched on so many topics. Just want to say, there's a lot of history that gets that I love a great saying that if you're reading your history and you're getting this warm fuzzy feeling from your country's history, you're reading the wrong history.
Positive side to the Scandinavians coming into Ireland is the insane level of multiculturalism. If you read the Icelandic saga, for example, you can see that Dublin, for example, was considered the New York of the period. If you really, like, it literally says in the Icelandic saga that Dublin was the capital of the Western world. And the thing is that I think I was reading a book the other day, and it literally compared the Scotland to the highways of all of this, because all of this was going in and out of Scotland like there was no tomorrow. And a lot of people scratched their head this year, because we now have DNA evidence to show that the Pictish had mixed in with the Scandinavians and Scotty and stuff, and people are like, okay, what's going on? And someone put down a very good point, that what you have is a lot of Pictish traders would have turned around and says, this territory was my ancestors, but you know what I like more? Money. I do like a bit of money. And there was a lot of money to be made out of the Scandinavians, who had built this amazing, I know it was made of boats and it wasn't really a highway, but it pretty much turned into a highway given the speed of the longships that would come in, trade in with the various Scottish ports, and then go back out over to Norway, come back over, trade in with the main Scots again, and then go over into Dublin and various other Hiberno Scandinavian ports. And so during the Viking Age, it really turned into one of these great trading highways. So with that, guys, thanks very much for watching the show. Definitely head over to Celtic Decoded and definitely subscribe. His video on the Dal Riata is absolutely amazing. It's why I had to invite him on the show and try to build up into the Viking Age. Other than that, guys, thanks very much. And Stephen, once again, thank you so much for coming on to the show. Your insight into the Dal Riata is absolutely amazing. It definitely gave us the foundation, especially with myself, because although I'm actually quite good at Irish history, when it comes down to Scottish history, it's a blur to me. And you've definitely decoded it for me. That's for sure.
Thanks for having us on.
Oh, anytime. And you've got upcoming videos. I think you were saying that there was one coming up for Alexander. Really looking forward to that. And other than that, guys, subscribe to both of our channels. Don't subscribe to Clans and Dynasty. He has too much, especially when he's gone up to, was it 10,000 subscribers now, is it?
Nearly. A couple of hundred off,
Yeah, that's too much for you. Don't subscribe. In fact, unsubscribe from him. He needs to come down to our level. Sick of all this, man. No, all jokes aside, go over to Clans and Dynasties. He's about to hit that insane level of subscription. Other than that, guys, all the best and thanks very much.